Mage of the Ruined City. Now, ordinarily I would not really have done this unless it was like more of a gag review. But with Thanksgiving being in the recent past and things of that nature, you know, it's the season for giving. It's the season for being thankful. It's the season to be in many senses of the words. And I am kind of thankful that this book got published, even in the abhorrent state that it was published in. So let's go ahead and break this down. Now, the basis of the story is Armid is a mage, and he's out searching for some sort of a cure or stopgap measure for an ailment where he has horrid nightmares every night, and when he casts magic, he becomes extremely weak, which for a mage is a very, very bad thing. And through the course of his searching for this, he encounters a young elf girl, saves her life in the very opening chapter. And she just kind of tags along with him until she finds a safer place to set down roots and just kind of starts following him. And we bring in members of his former adventuring group, and they go adventuring for this, and they are beset upon eventually by trackers from a enigmatic queen. Now, through the use of a seer in the town, he finds out that what would most likely help his ailment is an ancient weapon from the devastating Soul Stealer Wars of over 300 years ago. Now, the Soul Stealer Wars were when the undead and the dead and the living basically started clashing for control of a region, and it was a horrible war because with undead creatures like vampires and ghouls, ghasts, wraiths, things of that nature, generally speaking, the dead don't stay dead for the entirety of the time. So, generally speaking, the more heavy the losses, the worse the next battle would be. And it drug on for a century, and nobody really knows what caused it to end. But during the course of this war, there were things called true named weapons. Weapons that had moderate sentience and personalities that dealt horrible, devastating damage to the undead, especially incorporeal undead, which normally you need a special weapon to do damage to. So one of these weapons was the warhammer of a dwarf thane named Kalesh, and it was rumored, never confirmed, but rumored to be able to steal abilities from those that it's slain. So when they receive a direction where the first piece is, they go out to seek it, and the clues that tell him where the first piece is very cryptic in the original voicing of it, where it says to seek it under the tolling bells of the city of your birth. And you find out later on that Armid was born in a city named Gabral, which was destroyed 300 years prior. And this ties into his malady. When Gabral was destroyed through an arcane event of unknown origin and unknown power, the entire town was literally ripped from existence. The land around it was blighted, and the blight has just been spreading over the last 300 years. The surrounding area and the local point of where Gabral used to stand is now referred to by most people in the area as the ruins. And if you have any sort of intelligence at all, you do not go into the ruins. All sorts of horrible creatures have made it its home. Nothing there is as it seems. Plants that look like one type of plant are not that type of plant. Animals that look like an animal aren't that animal. Magic doesn't quite work that way, and rogue dragons love to use that as their nesting grounds. And it just so happens that that's where this piece of the hammer is. Now, how that ties into his malady is, when the town was ripped out of existence, he was close to the town. And the arcane backwash of this spell forced him to have all of the memories, the last 5 to 10 minutes worth of memories from this town folk, shoved into his brain. And every night he relives the last couple of minutes of all the town folk that were in this town. So these nightmares are not nightmares so much as they are a type of past life for him. And it's really horrific because he basically, every time he dreams, he dies. He dies over and over and over again. Gabral was a huge city. It had thousands of inhabitants. And this ties into why he's lived so long, because each of these souls that was shoved into his being have passed on part of their life essence into him. So, pardon the unintentional pun, he is living literally on borrowed time. And it is assumed that once this extension of his life has, he's burned off all this extra time, and his normal lifespan will resume from where it was, and he was in his late 20s, early 30s. This ties into his magic as well, because whenever he starts casting a spell, all the voices of these dead souls that were spellcasters recognize the spell from the arcane currents and start casting it in their own language, in their own fashion. Magic is a very, very loose set of traditions in this book, whereas it's not the words that make the difference. It's not the hand gestures, and it's not the materials you use, although that is fairly consistent across. It's the mental will and the image that the mage forms that starts the arcane torrent that turns into the spell. And because of this, every race has their own method of casting. Every school of magic has their own method of casting, and that differs from one country to the next. And so, what it sounds like literally is hundreds of voices in his head start clamoring in clashing languages, clashing words, and it's like being in a large crowd of people constantly talking. And magic takes concentration, and when you're trying to focus on your own symbology and words and mental image of what you want to happen, you have to block all those people out, and it's what normally takes a small expenditure of energy is now taking a much larger toll on him because of the extra concentration that he has to put forth to cast a spell. Now, they go and they start delving through the tombs, and they've brought along the parts of his former adventuring group that are still alive or unretired. And they go forth, and they're being tracked by a trio of rangers that were sent forth by a queen who rules a small little fiefdom near the Necrolands, which is where the undead were forced back into. It's shrouded in perpetual night and patrolled by the best of the best warriors of all the lighted lands. And we're not really told a lot about her in this first book. It was this story is very very abrupt. It introduces a lot of concepts that were intended to be developed later on, and this was intended to be a trilogy of books.
3 books. Wait a minute. Hold it. Nobody said anything about 3 books.
After the hassle of trying to get this one published and trying to complete my education degree and get everything else, bills paid and, keeping the apartment, food in the fridge and things like that, it just got to the point where I didn't have enough free time to sit down and write the other 2 books. And honestly, the publisher that I got it published through, I was not pleased with them. They didn't do any editing. They didn't do any formatting. They didn't offer me any criticism, which should have been my first clue to back out. And when I got my author's copies, I was finding typos that I had missed. I was able to find them in my original draft. And then I found typos from the typesetting that were not there when I sent the copy in. And the biggest problem of it all was they did no marketing. Marketing was all on me, and even back in those days, this is 2010, before a lot of the big, huge price jumps, even then marketing would have cost a cool $1,500 in my area. And, I was in college, I was working a part-time job while going to school. I didn't have that kind of money to just drop on marketing, even though Amazon, shortly after I pulled the rights and let the book lapse into out of print, Amazon did come out with a reasonably priced marketing service, which, 2 ships passing in the night. But, that is kind of the tale of this story. And where do I fall on this one? Well, there are obvious problems. There are plot holes that I intended to be filled in later books, which never got written. There are plot holes that my mind filled in as I wrote, so they're sitting there and never answered. There are pacing problems because when I sent the book in, I originally thought it was going to be too long. So I started cutting pieces out, and while it wasn't a real hatchet job, it did kind of mess with the flow in some chapters. There are characterization problems because of my pacing problems, where things change too quickly or not quickly enough depending on the circumstances, where in the original draft of it, it made perfect sense, but when I did the hatchet job to pull pieces of what I thought were unimportant out, I forgot to adjust the timelines as well, and therefore characterization's a little weird. Speaking of characterizations, the cast, I could have severely trimmed the cast down. There's 2 characters in it where I really could have made them 1 character instead of 2, because as far as the adventure goes, they really serve mostly the same role as far as combat and magic goes. And that was a goblin paladin and a dwarf cleric. I could have made it 1 character and not have lost anything. And really, anybody who reads this book would be able to tell just how large of a gaming nerd I am, because I put in it everything that I loved reading about from all sorts of books and games and things like that. And anybody who reads this book would recognize things like the airships from Final Fantasy, talking animals, D&D style class names, and magic and fighting monsters.
fencing, fighting, torture, revenge, giants, monsters, chases, escapes, true love, miracles.
Doesn't sound too bad. I'll try and stay awake.
It's just, while trying to fit into a niche, I actually let too many cliches slide into the work, and that really detracts from it too. I've had some people ask if I was going to re-release the book, possibly in the future, but I would have to do some serious editing and put parts back in that I'd cut out, if I can remember how they went. Extend some parts, shorten some parts, possibly combine the two characters together, and I really need to rethink the name for the Elf Girl. The Elf Girl was intended to be the audience's proxy, where she sits there and she's been very sheltered, and she sees things for the first time as we see things for the first time. And in of that itself, it was a good idea, but I didn't think everything through. I made a red-headed elf with the name Ariel. What was I thinking? I mean, seriously, what was I thinking? It was just, in my head, I always pronounced it in a different way than Ariel. It was never pronounced Ariel, it was more of an Ariel. But I spelled it that way too, and I don't even think I realized it. And I had a number of beta readers comment on the fact that, you know, she's got the temper, and she's that redheads temperamentally have, and I'm not making generalizations on that. It is literally, I made her a hot-headed little spoiled little brat in a way. And if I don't completely change it to a different name, I am definitely changing the spelling when I rewrite this. And I'm going to make her a little less bratish, maybe make her a little bit more worldly because of how old she is and things of that nature. You know, minor things that, looking back on it, it didn't make sense. I mean, she's the audience proxy, but she's going to know about some things, just having lived and traveled in the short little spaces she's traveled in. So let's get down to the actual brass tacks of the review of this book. Now, this is kind of a short one. It's not really an informal review, or it's an informal review. It's not an actual scripted review, as Into the Archives usually do. So, and seeing as how this is out of print, I really can't recommend you guys going out and getting it. And I wouldn't have done it even if it was still in print, because the publishing company, when they printed it out, it came just short of 200 pages, and they were charging $25 for it. So who knows what the inflations would have done for it now. The box of author copies that I got, the ones that I did sell, I sold for like $7, $8, you know, comparable prices for a book of that size. You know, it was massively overpriced. It was massively undermarketed. Basically, we got a blurb in the local newspaper. That was the marketing thing, and it was really, really, really poorly done. And as far as the scoring system, because of some of the books coming up in the reviews, I've had to alter it from a 5-point scoring system to a 10-point scoring system, just because some books that I have lined up are just so difficult to line up that 5 points was constrictive and could be misconstrued for some of these later books. So we will be using a 10-point system from now on. And let's start with the plot. The plot is both good and bad. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10 for the plot. And most of that is because it has a unique plot. This guy has a unique malady that I've not seen in any book before or since. And it does detract a bit because it is man seeks MacGuffin. type of plot, And even though that is kind of the basis of a lot of stories, especially fictional stories, sword and sorcery stories, it was really, it's done in everything. Yeah, there was not really a big bad. The big bad's not announced until the end of this book. And it turns out that she has the exact same condition he does, only where he's been trying to resist the effects of the souls. She's actually sublimated and subjugated the souls to increase her own power. Which makes you wonder how she got that condition in the first place. So, yeah, it's man seeks magic object to cure X. So it's not really the most original plot. It's just presented in a more unusual way. Characterizations and stories, again, I'm gonna have to give this like a 4 out of 10 because there are some serious problems with characterization. Like I mentioned, there's the main cast is too large. I could easily have combined characters. There are changes in characterizations, which you should have happen in a good book. It should have a flow, and characters should be slightly different at the end of a book than they were when they started. However, some of these changes occur too quickly and then are negated, and that's due to my hatchet editing again. And then there are some characters that change suddenly with no warning, and it's not really explained why. And these are things that I could have caught with a really, really good editor, or with letting it sit off to the side for a couple of months and let all of the mental hole fillings going away, and then reading it again with fresh eyes. So I'm, depending on how I look at it again, if I read it again in the near future, I might bump it up to 5. But there were some definite problems with the characterization. Pacing, pacing is horrible. The pacing needs serious work on it, because there are things that could have been explained that made the pacing flow a little bit better. I'm gonna have to give this a 2 on the pacing, and I admit I screwed up the pacing when I started taking pieces out. It's my own fault. I have no one to blame but myself. Now, technicality parts, the grammar, the punctuation, for the most part, those are pretty tight. I'd give those a 7, because I was a dual major with English, and it's just one of those things that was drilled into my head through all the college courses and high school and things like that. I've been writing off and on for decades, and punctuation and grammar have always been really, really good with me, and I think part of that comes from having a grandmother that was an English teacher, and just for some reason I love reading, so I see all the grammar that's used in a lot of different styles, and I see a lot of the vocabulary that's been used through the ages, and things that have changed, things that have stayed the same. I still have trouble telling the difference between a gopher and a gerund sometimes. But that's just because I keep forgetting that gophers have tails, and gerunds usually are the ing at the end, the tail of the word. And if I could remember that more, I'd remember what a gerund is more. So yeah, technical aspects, I'd give it a 7. Nah, let's give it a 6 instead of a 7. So you've got that going on. So how do I rate the book overall? I'm gonna have to say it's a 6 out of 10 overall. I mean, even with that 2 for pacing, the book has potential. It's average and it has potential, but it's not exactly a must read. So in and of itself, it's a really good. It's a good first attempt for an author. I should say that, and I will highly recommend, if there is a copy of it floating around, I know Amazon shows it on their pages and Barnes and Nobles. I don't know if it's because it was put into their catalog or if they actually purchased copies. I don't think that's the case because the publisher I used is a print-on-demand publisher, and since I had the rights revoked and referred back to me, I highly doubt you'll be able to get a copy of it now. Interested parties, I do still have the manuscript, and I would be willing to put it out on Kindle in its state as it is now, and then as I finish editing it, re-release it as a second edition or a revised edition. I might think about doing that, but I have to see some interest in that before I do it. So it brings back some good memories because of where I was when I was writing it and enjoying the writing process. And even if I was tired of writing the story itself, I still wanted to write. I still wanted to keep my writing chops up, so I started writing short stories and little vignettes based in the same world. And that Christmas, I actually wrote a lot of these short stories for friends of mine that played WoW with me, and I took their characters and built them up and made a little like 1,500 to 2,000 word flash fiction for them as Christmas gifts, and they really enjoyed those. Those I am going to be putting up on Kindle just because I have the character's owner's permissions to publish these, and some of them actually tie into others. So maybe in the near future I will be releasing these as a collection. Now, final score 6 out of 10. I can't give it any better because of all the problems that I caused with the pacing and the characterizations. I can't give it any higher because of the hack job editing that the publisher did and that I did with a hatchet. So if it had been picked up by a reputable publisher instead of a vanity publisher, maybe it could have hit a 7 or an 8 because it would have had an actual professional editor go in there and say, look, this needs to go, this needs to go, this needs to be built up. And they probably would have helped me from having all the video game and fantasy novel references in there that I did, veiled and unveiled. So there you have it. That's the informal review of my personal book, Bells of Requiem, Mage of the Ruined City. I really need to rethink that title too because it just doesn't work. It should be something a little shorter. Mage of the Ruined City works for the book, but I need to rethink the series name. But that's all in the future, and it will come to pass soon enough. Now, let's take a look at what we're doing for the next actual formal review of Into the Archives, and that will be... oh, fuck buckets. We'll see you this time. Still doesn't help the writing to read it upside down.
If you don't mind my saying, I don't like your attitude one bit.